sorry, I hadn't even gotten on group-wise to see that.
She had quite a time. She spent 8 days in ICU.
Wow.
They did.
Hi, Pam.
Maybe.
You're here. Yay! You're done here.
Pharmacy and AFib at the same time, and couldn't get her heart rate to stay down. So they did a left heart cath. They shocked her heart. They did X-rays, CT, CAT scan, and every test.
I did. I got a bunch of them cut. Yeah. Yeah. See, I've never had, my hair has never grown long. It's just grown out. It just gets thick. It never gets long. Like back when I was in junior high and high school, when, not like crazy long mullets, but when kind of, the longer hair for guys in the back and stuff, I had friends of mine that could do that. And all the girls liked them and all that kind of stuff. And I never could get my hair to grow long. Every time I tried to get it to grow long, it just went out. Yeah, it's a chia pet. That's me. So I have never had need for a ponytail holder of any kind. So. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe so.
The director out at the boys' place.
Uh-huh.
She talked to me after. She introduced me to some of the boys.
Oh, good.
And she said if there's anything, any community projects or anything we could ever use their help on,
Yep.
that she'd just be happy to help. So she can't just
Okay.
anything we can do because they just so appreciate the assistance.
Sure.
The boys just love her. Oh, this is a lady that delivers the well, they're on this games and
Yeah, thanks. They keep going. Yeah. That's right. I got important things going on right now.
Yeah, she said if you ever have any community projects.
Yeah.
And jokingly, I got a bunch of trees down in my yard.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, and I said, I'm only joking.
Yeah.
I have grandsons that
Yeah.
I'm going to do.
But I do, I may get a hold of her because there's a couple of places that I found out this week that it's not the big, like, let's get chainsaws out and cut everything down. It's dragging limbs from backyards to the street so they can get picked up and that kind of stuff. So I might.
There were a couple of times I dropped them off and just dropped them off and left. And then she met me.
Yeah.
in the car and said,
Yeah.
I haven't gotten to meet you.
Yeah.
You've been super nice lady.
Yeah.
And then last Wednesday, she said, oh, you have to come in and meet the boys.
Oh, that's great. That's awesome. That's really cool. Oh, cool. Okay. Yeah. 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 Just mix it up a little bit. Yeah. Okay. Good to know. Okay. We're going to go ahead and get started. It's always, well, it's kind of like, church on Sundays too. It's always hit and miss during the summer, man. Everybody's got stuff going on. So glad you guys are here. I know we got some folks that are joining us online. I know I haven't talked to her personally, but I texted with Lindsay Myers last night to know that Lou's surgery went fine and she is home recovering. So I don't know if she's watching, but Lou, if you are, hey there. Okay. So, but I'm glad everything went well for that. She mentioned that in class last week, and so I'm glad everything went well with that. So we're in the book of Judges. We got through two of them last week with Othniel and Ehud. And so Brandon and I have kind of divvied up responsibilities for, we kind of went through the list. And so our plan for going through Judges is one of us, we won't have to, not have to, that's not the right word, but we're not going to tag team on these. We're just going to take, like, he'll take one, I'll take one, vice versa. So So today I'm talking about two more. I'm going to cover two judges today, just by myself. And before y'all, think there's no way in this world he can do that, just know that the first one that I'm going to talk about is only one verse that talks about him. So I can get that guy knocked out pretty quick. So we're in Judges chapter 3, the very end, the very last verse of Judges chapter 3. And we find this judge, and what is his name? Shamgar. Shamgar, okay? After Ehud came Shamgar, son of Anath, who struck down 600 Philistines with an ox goad, and he too saved Israel. So you have this story in chapter 3 that we talked about last week of Ehud, this left-handed guy, and it's this whole plot, this whole plan that he comes up with making this dagger and strapping it to his thigh and sneaking into the king and killing him and sneaking out the back door, and just all that whole description of that whole process. And then the very next thing is, here's just this one little sentence about Shamgar. As a matter of fact, in the original Hebrew, it only takes 18 words to describe Shamgar. So there's not a whole lot that we know about him. What do you see here? What do we know about Shamgar based on what you see in Judges 3, verse 31?
Well, he struck down 600 Philistines.
Okay, he killed 600 Philistines. All right, that's impressive.
What's an ox goad?
Israel.
Yeah, he saved Israel for sure, because that's the last sentence there, right? What's an ox goad? That was his weapon of choice. So an ox goad would be somewhat similar to a cattle prod. Not like the electric ones, but what you see, 4-H kids and stuff with a long stick with a point on the end of it. It would have been similar to that, although ox goads, specifically back in this time, probably the one that he was using, was not one that you would use when you're just standing right beside the cow or the ox or whatever it was. They would use them while they're plowing. And so it was longer. These would be like 8 to, at the most, 10 feet long. And it would have either a sharpened end. It would be made of wood. It have either sharpened end or a metal, a sharp point on the end of it. And that's all it was for, was as you're plowing. You've seen, I don't know, maybe some of y'all used them in times past, but, we got motorized tillers and stuff nowadays, but just the old plow, this, wooden handled thing with the metal blade at the bottom of it, that's not the easiest thing to dig through the soil. And so you got these oxen there pulling it. Well, they would get, to being belligerent and not wanting to go. And, you would just have this long stick that you could poke them with and make them keep going. So that was the whole thing with the ox goad. It also had a lot of them, I won't say everyone, but a lot of them had, on the other end of it, would have either metal or just be kind of cut into almost like a scraper, so that as you're going along, when dirt collected on the blade of your plow, you had this stick and you kind of scrape that off as you continue to plow along. So a couple of uses for it. So anyway, that was his weapon of choice. He killed 600 guys with this, which also I think tells you maybe something about Shamgar. As far he's I don't know how buff he was, but man, I don't know anybody that could take a sharp pointy stick and kill 600 guys with it, but he did. But it also is quite possible that he's a farmer by trade, that it wasn't one of these things that he set out to do, to be this military leader, but just when the opportunity presented itself, he saved Israel. He became a leader. He rescued Israel, and one of the ways that he did that was fighting 600 Philistines, apparently single-handed, with a big pointy stick. And God won a huge battle with him. So, I don't know. Life lessons from Shamgar. Anybody want to take a stab at it? Yeah. What do we learn from Shamgar? Or is it just a random story in Scripture? Apparently he wasn't afraid.
With God's help, you can do it.
You can do anything with God's help. Anything else?
He was a protector of his people.
He protected his people. They needed protection. They were being attacked by the Philistines, and he protected them. The only other thing that I thought of, besides what you guys have already said, is sometimes just use what you got in front of you. I don't know the whole situation of how he came to fight against 600 Philistines. But he's got an ox goad, and apparently he was pretty handy with it, and so had he had military training and known how to use a sword or, bow and arrow or spear, anything like that, maybe not. But when the opportunity presented itself, he just used what he had. And so sometimes we will limit ourselves, or maybe even think, I don't have what it takes to, help in this situation, to volunteer in this way. Somebody else with more money or a bigger house or more time, or, somebody else can do that. Use the opportunity in front of you and use what you have. God gave it to you for a reason. So he had a big pointy stick, and he saved Israel with it. And so I think it's just an impressive. I mean, you almost breeze past him. You talk about Othniel, Ehud, and you move on to Deborah, and it's like, oh wait, there's just one little verse tucked in here about this guy Shamgar. So he's not the person that we know the least about of these judges. We'll find another guy that we know even less about. But he's probably second on the list as far as like what we actually know about him, or the information that's given about him. So see, one judge down. There you go. We already got one. Okay. That took all of 6 minutes, 7 minutes. Okay. So let's get into chapter 4. And we're going to look at both chapters 4 and 5, and specifically, there's 3 different people that we're going to talk about, but the judge, herself is whom? Deborah. Okay. So you may be familiar with the story. You may know, like, you've heard of her, but you don't know that many details. So what I wanted to do is just go ahead, and if you don't mind taking the time, we'll read through all of chapter 4 and just kind of get the story down, and then we'll come back and pick out some highlights from it. That's okay with y'all. Okay. So starting with verse 1, Judges chapter 4. After Ehud died, the Israelites once again did evil in the eyes of the Lord. I'm going to interrupt myself real quick. Here we go in this cycle again, right? Everything's good. We worship idols. We fall away. God sends oppressors. We cry out to God. God sends a judge, a leader, a rescuer. We're back in God's good graces again. We fall away. It just keeps happening, okay? It's this cycle. Here we are again. And that's the way the author of Judges says it too. Once again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Verse 2. So the Lord sold them into the hands of Jabin, a king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. The commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth Haggayim. Because he had 900 iron chariots and had cruelly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years, they cried to the Lord for help. Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was leading Israel at the time, or maybe you have, your translation says judging. Verse 5, she held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the Israelites came to her to have their disputes decided. She sent for Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kedesh in Naphtali, and said to him, the Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go, take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun, and lead the way to Mount Tabor. I will lure Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his troops, to the Kishon River, and give him into your hands. Barak said to her, if you go with me, I will go, but if you don't go with me, I won't go. Very well, Deborah said, I will go with you, but because of the way you are going about this, the honor will not be yours, for the Lord will hand Sisera over to a woman. So Deborah went with Barak to Kedesh, where he summoned Zebulun and Naphtali. 10,000 men followed him, and Deborah also went with him. Now Heber, the Kenite, had left the other Kenites, the descendants of Hobab, Moses' brother-in-law, or some of your translations will say father-in-law, and pitched his tent by the great tree in Zananim near Kedesh. When they told Sisera that Barak, son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor, Sisera gathered together his 900 iron chariots and all the men with him from Harosheth Haggayim to the Kishon River. Then Deborah said to Barak, "Go, this is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you?" So Barak went down Mount Tabor, followed by 10,000 men. At Barak's advance, the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and army by the sword, and Sisera abandoned his chariot and fled on foot. But Barak pursued the chariots and army as far as Harosheth Haggayim. All the troops of Sisera fell by the sword, not a man was left. Sisera, however, fled on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, because there were friendly relations between Jabin, king of Hazor, and the clan of Heber the Kenite. Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Come, my lord, come right in. Don't be afraid." So he entered her tent, and she put a covering over him. "I'm thirsty," he said. "Please give me some water." She opened up a skin of milk and gave him a drink and covered him up. "Stand in the doorway of the tent," he told her. "If anyone comes by and asks you, 'Is anyone here?' say no." But Jael, Heber's wife, picked up a tent peg and a hammer and went quietly to him while he lay fast asleep, exhausted. She drove the peg through his temple into the ground, and he died. You think? It's kind of an obvious statement in Scripture. And he died. Barak came by in pursuit of Sisera, and Jael went out to meet him. "Come," she said, "I will show you the man you're looking for." So he went in with her, and there lay Sisera with the tent peg through his temple, dead. On that day, God subdued Jabin, the Canaanite king, before the Israelites, and the hand of the Israelites grew stronger and stronger against Jabin, the Canaanite king, until they destroyed him. Okay, so that's the story. Now, is this a brand new story, or is this a story that probably you've at least come across before? At least heard of it? Is this brand new for you, or you've heard of it? You've heard of it? Okay. So let's go back through some details. We got Israel doing evil again, so God allows someone to come up and oppress them. And what's this guy's name? Jabin. Okay, Jabin is the king of the Canaanites. Now, we've got this whole land called the land of Canaan, but there's a specific group of people that were the Canaanites. And it may be several different, smaller nations or tribes of people that have kind of united together, and he's ruling over them. But his capital city, or I guess the city that he's ruling from, is Hazor. Okay, so if you have those maps, which I can hand these back out, but if you have a map in your Bible, or you have the map that that Brandon handed out, Hazor is up at the north part of Israel, up above what we would call the Sea of Galilee. Okay. You want one of these?
No, you're fine.
Okay, I got extras though, if you want one. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. So it's also up here on the map behind me. So Hazor is up here. All right. And that's where he's oppressing Israel from. Now, we talked before about how it may not be the entire nation that he is conquering and ruling over. It may just be this northern area, or it might be the whole nation, because there's several tribes that are talked about in the next chapter, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So he's in Hazor, and now he's got the leader of his army, who is Sisera. Oh, let me back up. Sorry. Back to Hazor. This is a large city. It was a large city even back in this time. And the first time that we see it mentioned is in Genesis, and then it's later on in Joshua, as the Israelites are conquering the Canaanites as they've come into the Promised Land. As a matter of fact, in Joshua chapter 11, Joshua and his army conquered Hazor and burned it to the ground. Over the years, it got rebuilt. As a matter of fact, it was one of the more prominent cities when David was reigning, and then Solomon even made it more fortified, because there's nations to the north of Israel, and it was a fortress kind of city. It also sat on the main route between Egypt and Babylon. So if you can think, just a map in your mind where Egypt is in northeast Africa, and Babylon would be modern day Iraq. You know, in ancient times, you had just certain highways, certain routes, and especially coming from Babylon down to Egypt, that would kind of follow the Fertile Crescent. You had roads that would keep you from going out into the wilderness, where there would be rivers and places to water yourself and your animals and stuff like that. So this city sat on that main route between those two nations. During David's reign, this is what archaeologists have figured out. During David's reign, the city of Hazor was maybe 10 times as big as the city of Jerusalem. And so I share that with you because I want you to understand, like, this is for Jabin to have Hazor as his capital city, demonstrates the kind of strength and the kind of power and the kind of authority they had over this territory, and why it would be so difficult for the Israelites to fight back and to rise up against him. Okay. Now, he oppresses Israel for 20 years, and then he's got Sisera, that's the commander of his army, that is based in Harosheth Haggayim, and I don't think that's on here on this map that we gave you guys. Harosheth Haggayim is west of the Jordan River. It's more kind of towards the central part of Israel. It kind of be in, well, here's Mount Tabor here. It kind of be in, maybe in this area right here. Okay. So that's where he's based at. And what specifically do we know about the army that he's in charge of?
900 chariots with iron.
Okay, so this is the Iron Age, and this is, as far as iron goes back in this time, not everybody had it. First of all, not everybody had access to it. Second of all, even if you had access to it, not every nation had the ability and the technology to do anything with it. So this is just, this is one of the ages where iron is becoming prominent at this time. So he's got 900 chariots, and they have, not that they are fully made of iron, but they've got iron on them. That maybe there's iron attached, I don't know, to the wheels. Maybe there's iron attached to the sides of the chariot itself, that, kind of like armor plating that we see in military vehicles nowadays. So it's much more protective, much more difficult to fight against. They would be heavier than a lot of chariots. The Egyptians had chariots even centuries before this, but those things were built for speed. It was usually 2-man little chariots that were really meant just to move swiftly towards the other army with your cavalry and kind of mow down these soldiers, or bring an archer nearby and attack them that way. These iron chariots would have been a little heavier, a little bulkier, but would have been really hard for a person with almost no armor to stand up against. You're getting trampled by horses who are pulling iron-plated chariots. That's a destructive force. He's got 900 of them. Okay, so this is another reason why the Israelites can't fight back, or at least they feel that way. They don't see any way that they can fight back against Sisera and against Jabin. Okay, and so we know that ahead of time. Then we find this woman named Deborah. Now, what does it tell us about her in verses 4 and 5? Okay. First of all, she's a female prophet. So this is the book of Judges, and we're talking about Judges, but we know that she's a prophet. That's one of the things that it says right off the bat. So what does that mean? What is a prophet? Huh?
Isn't it they're appointed by God?
Yeah, they're appointed by God for what purpose?
To get Israel to turn back to God.
Right. A lot of times when we talk about prophets and prophecy, what does that conjure up in our minds? I'm seeing the future. It's fortune telling, right? And that's not always the case, especially in Scripture. And we talked about this when we were studying the prophets a while back. But a prophet of God may tell future events, or may just be telling something that God just wants you to know right now in this moment. It is someone who is proclaiming a message that has been specifically given to them by God for a specific audience for a specific purpose. Okay, and that's the role that she's playing. She has some kind of connection. God is somehow revealing messages to her, and she's sharing those with the people. Now, what else do we know about her? Yeah, whoever he is. Yeah, we don't know for sure. That's about all that we know about it. Although, oh man, I didn't write this down in my notes. There's something about that name that I think has to do with fire. And so there's some people that, Lightning Flash. Okay. And there's some people that think it's not her husband, that it's not saying she's because the Hebrew would just be a woman of, like belonging to Lapidoth, but rather it's talking more about her personality. That she's kind of a fireball kind of woman. Yeah. So, don't know that for sure. That's just maybe one of her character traits. But then what is her, she was leading or judging Israel, right? Mine says leading, but then it's got a footnote that says judging. Anybody else? Okay. But then verse 5 tells us what? What does she do on a regular basis? Okay. So people all over Israel can come to her with whatever their disputes are, and she decides them for them. She's a judge. Now, I'll tell you this. Of the 15 judges that we are looking at in the book of Judges, she is the only one that is described as actually doing any judging, which is kind of funny. But we call them judges, but you don't see any of them. None of them are described. Now, I'm not saying they didn't. None of them are described as, settling court cases, things like that. She's the only one where it says this is what she does. And there's a specific location that you can come to. They even named a tree after her. She sat under this tree, and they're like, that's Deborah's tree. You can go over there, and she'll decide your disputes for you. Okay? So, in order for her to have, first of all, this job of being an actual judge, but second of all, to have this role as a prophetess, what does that tell you about kind of her status as far as Israel is concerned?
She was esteemed.
Very much so. Very esteemed. She has prestige is not the right word, but people looked up to her. She's leading Israel. It was your tribal leaders. It was your later on your monarchs. David, Solomon, all the kings after them. They served as judges for the people. She's a leader in Israel. Is that typical for this time frame? No. Now, let me say this. When you get to Jesus' time in the Jewish culture, women in Jewish culture were definitely seen as inferior, seen as the weaker gender, and almost like property in Jewish culture. Not quite, but almost. Okay? It wasn't that bad for the most part in Old Testament times. However, they were still seen as the weaker gender. It was the men who were in charge of everything, and it was the men who were usually looked to as the elders and leaders of their tribes. So she's breaking the cultural norms by having this role, by doing what she's doing. Okay? Let's see what else. Okay, so then she sends for a guy, and his name is... it's not... maybe you can call it Barack. I don't know. I always heard Barak, but now that we've had a president named Barack, maybe it is Barack. I don't know. I won't be able to get out of the habit of saying Barak, though. But he lives in Kadesh, and that city, let's see if that's on your map. It's a little further north. It's not on this map. So if Hazer is right here, Kadesh is up in this area here. Okay? So it's even a little further north. It's in the tribe of Naphtali. Deborah sends for Barak. For what purpose? He shows up and she tells him what? What's What'd she send for him for?
Take 10,000 men from these 2 tribes and go.
Okay. Take 10,000 men and go fight against Sisera. Go fight against the Canaanites with their 900 iron chariots. Okay. Does Barak want to go? Yeah, it's not a flat no, I'm not going. It's I'll go, but only if what? Now, why do you think that?
He didn't trust her.
Well, no,
He didn't trust her?
She was a judge and represented God, and if she was in front of you, then it was a real sign that God was with them.
Okay. So if she's a prophetess, she's getting messages from God, then for her to be with the army at the battle would be God will be here with us at the battle too. Okay. Why'd you say he doesn't trust her, Mariette?
I would think that even today, men are a little bit leery of women leaders.
Okay.
And, or he may have thought, didn't trust her because he may have thought she was setting him up.
Yeah. Or that she doesn't know what she's talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Like a mindset.
Yeah. But he makes this deal. He's like, yeah, I'll go. But you got to come with me. And you do see this. We're going to see this with a couple more judges too, where God says, here's what I want you to go do. And they're like, okay, but is this really what you want me to do? And so Barak's the same way. And it is one of those things that you also see in the Old Testament of wanting some kind of physical representation of God with you. So later on, at the end of Judges, really the first part of 1 Samuel, when Samuel is a kid, the Israelites are fighting a battle, and they bring the Ark of the Covenant, the gold box that represented God's presence. They bring that to the battlefield. Why? Because they want to feel like God was there with them. Okay, so it's not completely uncommon. And I think you're right. If nothing else, if God is giving messages to Deborah, and God says, Deborah, tell Barak that I want Barak to go attack, and Barak's like, okay, fine, I'm going to bring the one who told me to do this with me. It's kind of a guarantee, or at least in his mind. Okay, so she says she'll go, but what's going to happen? Okay, and it's also interesting. I mean, again, with Barak being timid, look at how she describes it. Let's see. Because in verse 7, he says, here's what's going to happen. God's going to lure Sisera and his troops and give them into your hands. Like, it's already done. God's going to do this. And he's still unsure about it. And so she says, okay, I will go with you. And we're still going to win because God's already determined that we're going to win. But who's going to get the glory? Well, the Lord is, obviously, but she says a woman is. But she doesn't say the name. She says a woman is. So maybe he's thinking, well, then Deborah's going to get credit, and he's okay with that. Maybe that's what she thought too. Maybe God didn't reveal to her exactly who it was, and she thought she's going to get credit for it. I don't know. But she just tells him, the glory, the honor for this battle is going to go to a woman. Okay, so they tell him to get all these guys together, this 10,000 people, these 10,000 soldiers, on Mount Tabor. Now that is in your that is on your map. That is right here. Okay. And the Kishon River, I believe, is this one right here, but I'm not positive. It's not labeled right there. But it is pretty close to this area. So Mount Tabor, when I was at Harding, and I was from Arkansas, and people from Colorado used to make fun of us when we called it the Boston Mountains, in Northwest Arkansas. They're like, that's not a mountain. Let me show you a mountain. Mount Tabor is about 1,800 feet high. It's up here in the northern part of Israel to the west of the Sea of Galilee. What's interesting about it is, and you can see pictures of it online and stuff, it's kind of a round, it almost looks like a dome. It's a rounded mountain, really in the middle of a valley. Like, it kind of stands out. It's not the highest peak in Israel, but it's one of the higher ones and one of the more prominent ones, especially in this area. So God tells Barak to gather all of his 10,000 soldiers there on Mount Tabor, which they do. Sisera finds out about this, gets the 900 chariots together, and they go on the attack. Okay? Now, they show up at the Kishon River, which is close to Mount Tabor. And then all we know is that a battle takes place and the Israelites win, right? Verse 14. Go, the Lord is given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you? Like, she's already telling, like, God has already started this battle. God is already winning it for you. And Barak and his men come running down the mountain, and they attack and they kill all of them. It says there wasn't a man left except for Sisera. Now, how these 10,000 soldiers, we don't know how big the army was to go along with the 900 chariots. How do the Israelites win this battle? I mean, I know obviously the answer is God won it for them, but like, what had to have happened here? Are they just that much better soldiers? Chaos ensued, especially when you start losing a battle.
Well, because God, that was one of his things, is to cause chaos to the opposition in many of the battles that were fought.
Okay, so to throw the army into confusion.
Right.
Mm-hmm. That could be part of it for sure. Anybody else? Yeah, the Lord routed him, Sisera, and all his chariots and his army by the sword. But how did he do that? So, hold your finger there, or I guess if you got your app, we're going to go to the next chapter, chapter 5, which is called what? The Song of Deborah. Okay? She and Barak sang this song. And there's details about the battle throughout this whole thing. Look at verses 4 and 5 of this song. O Lord, when you went out from Seir, when you marched out from the land of Edom, the earth shook, the heavens poured, and the clouds poured down with water. The mountains quaked before the Lord, the one of Sinai, before the Lord, the God of Israel. So what does it sound like was happening when God showed up? Not just the earth shaking, but heavy rains. Okay, so if we're in a valley with a river that is known to this day to flood with heavy rainfall, and the area around it either becomes, fully flooded or becomes swampy because of heavy rainfall, what does that do to chariots? Bogs them down. They can't maneuver, right? Especially chariots that are plated with what? Iron. Okay? So now they can't maneuver. So most scholars think that's when it says God routed them, that's what he used. He used rainfall. He caused rain to pour down, caused flooding in the area, and as the Israelites are descending down the mountain, these chariots that had been so formidable and so seemingly invincible are now literally stuck in the mud or being swept away by floodwaters. So if your secret weapon is no longer, not just not a secret, it is no longer usable, your army doesn't know how to fight. They don't know how to defend themselves without these 900 chariots in front of them, right? And so it does throw them into confusion. It does create some chaos. Exactly. That is also why Sisera is on foot. Is because he probably got stuck. Okay? So it's an interesting little detail. Now, in Judges 4, it doesn't specifically say that, but you see this hint at it in the song in Judges chapter 5. And so that's what, like I said, that's what a lot of people believe actually happened. That doesn't remove God's power. That's actually what God used. And you can imagine Barak and his army as they're running down the mountain towards this other army, and they see the rain come, and they see those chariots start to get stuck or get caught up, maybe and swept away in this flood stage of this river, there would be excitement on their part. Hey, maybe we can actually do this. And the fear or the apprehension turns to confidence, and they completely destroy this army, where Sisera is the only one that survives. Okay? Now, he flees on foot, and he gets to the dwelling, the tent of this guy named Heber, who is what I guess we could say nationality, or what clan, or what family, or what tribe. He's the Kenite, and that's mentioned in verse 11. Heber the Kenite. Now, the Kenites were descended. Well, we don't know exactly who they're descended from. One of the main people that we see mentioned as being a Kenite is in Exodus. I believe it's chapter 18, when Moses is leading the people through the wilderness, and his father-in-law, Jethro, comes to him and gives him some advice on what he needs to do. Jethro is a Kenite. The other Kenites, it says, I believe in Numbers even, go with the Israelites when they do go up to the promised land. Some of them go into the promised land with them. Matter of fact, there's a battle later. Oh man, I can't even think of it off the top of my head. Where a message is sent to the Kenites, and I think it's Saul that sends a message and tells them, "Hey, y'all need to move away from the Amalekites that I'm about to attack, because I'm about to slaughter them, and I don't want to slaughter you in the process." So they continue to live with the Israelites. And what we know about this guy, Heber, is that while most of the Kenites would have come across a river here and settled in this area, he moved up north with his family, okay, for whatever it's worth. So the Kenites have a connection, have a relationship with the Israelites. There's a peace there. They're in connection, community with each other, all right? But Heber also has at least a friendship with who? Go back to verse 11. I'm sorry. That's the wrong verse. Go back to verse 17. There were friendly relations between who? Jabin and Heber. Okay? So he's living up here, and while Jabin is coming in and kind of taking over, he's kind of established a friendship at least. He's not being oppressive to Heber and to his clan and his particular group of people. So when Sisera flees the battle on foot, and you gotta see, that's a few miles, man. I mean, Mount Tabor's here, and Kadesh is on up here. Like it's a ways. Like Sisera, this isn't just like running across a field, and he's on foot for a while, and Barak and his men are chasing him. So you can see why he would be exhausted. I mean, this is miles that he's run on foot after a full battle. Okay. But he would assume that he's going to be safe when he gets to Heber's tent, because they're friends with Jabin. He's the commander of Jabin's army. He may have even been here before.
What was the terrain between the two places?
You got mountains, like there's Mount Tabor here, and there's kind of somewhere.
So like, could this been like a while, and he could have hidden some and come out hiding?
Yeah, I'm not for sure, and most people don't know for sure. I used to think when I was a kid and heard the story, like it's just a few hours later after the battle. It could be days. It could be days that he's hiding and and Barak is just tracking him and trying to catch up with him. Yep. So, and I think that is probably more realistic and more true, and it gives more credence to why he was so exhausted. Because he has no supplies, he has no food, he's running for his life, and then he gets here and he thinks this is safe. This is a safe place to be, because I know these people. They know my king. Like I said, they probably even know him. He's probably been here before. If Heber has such a good connection with Jabin. So Jael sees him and says, "Oh, come on in. Let me hide you." Lets him lay down, puts a covering over him. And what does he ask her for? Well, he asked her specifically for water. What does she give him? Well, she gives him milk. So,
Yeah, but in the next chapter it says curdled milk.
well, that doesn't necessarily mean rotten, though. That, yeah. But yes, yeah, it could be. Yeah, it just kind of has some, because people ate curds, you know. I mean, it could be. Anyway, the reason I bring that up is because, I mean, you think about it. Like, what's one of the old school remedies for not being able to sleep at night? Warm milk, right? Okay, so she gives him milk. I mean, it's not just water that she gives him. So if he's already exhausted, and now he's got a belly full of milk, you know, he falls right to sleep. She's got him covered up. But he's got a plan. Stand at the front of the tent and do what?
No one's here.
Okay, if anybody comes by, tell them nobody's here. It's just me. Nobody's here. And she says, okay. But then what does she actually do? Yeah, these are not the little tent stakes that we, you know, the little pup tent that we go to the campground with. This would be a large stake for a large tent. I mean, you can imagine this is an entire family living inside this thing. So she takes this tent peg and nails him to the ground through the temple. Okay.
Didn't women typically pitch the tents?
I don't know for sure. That's a good question. I don't know if I know they took care of everything once the tent's been set up. I don't know if they were the ones that did the setting up. For sure. Yeah, this would not be uncommon for. Yeah, and if you're living in a tent, I mean, how many times, you know, does the tent peg come out or one of the poles fall? Like, I'm sure she would. This is not a first time for her to swing this hammer. She's probably pretty adept with it, obviously. Okay. I don't know that it took one swing. It doesn't say, but, you know. Anyway, she nails him to the ground. It went all the way through into the ground. And then Bayrat comes by and she's like, I got the guy you're looking for. And he comes in and sees him dead. So who gets it's not who gets the credit for winning the battle, because ultimately God does that, but even Bayrat gets credit for leading the troops. But who gets the honor and the glory for killing the commander of the other army? She does, which is what Deborah said. It wasn't Deborah that got credit for it. It was Jael, but it's a woman that got credit instead of Bayrat. Okay. And so if you go to the end of chapter 5 and verse 31, once Deborah is judging, and you know, I don't know how long, it doesn't say at what point she ever died, so I don't know how long she lived. But how long does the land have peace? 40 years. Okay? Land had peace for 40 years. Or at least this area of the land did. All right. So, a few minutes left. Let me point out a couple of things real quick. Well, one thing in particular, again, going to chapter 5, you find some more details about, you know, everything that happened in this battle. And I wanted to point out to you, what were the two main tribes that these troops came from, that Barak led? Naphtali and starts with a Z, ends in Ebulun. Zebulun, very good. Okay, Naphtali and Zebulun. Okay, and just so you know, if you ever look, and maybe you got this in your the back of your Bibles as well, but Naphtali would be in this area right here, and Zebulun is right above, right around this Mount Tabor area. Okay, so those are the two tribes that God specifically says, I want you to get troops from there. Now, there were other tribes of Israel that had opportunity to join in. So if you look through this song, look at verses 16. Yeah, 15, 16, and 17. Verse 15, the princes of Issachar were with Deborah. Yes, Issachar was with Barak, rushing after him into the valley. So we got Naphtali and Zebulun, but we also had some some folks from Issachar show up, and Issachar is further south. It's down in this area, more central. In the districts of Reuben, what happened there? In verse 15.
They stayed with their sheep.
Yeah, it says,
Searching their heart.
okay, there was much searching of heart. What does that mean? And kept thinking about it. And kept thinking about it. And like, pros and cons. Let's see. And it happens to a lot of us. They just thought about it, and I'm not for sure. So they obviously they ended up deciding not to go. It's odd that Reuben is pointed out, because Reuben, the tribe of Reuben, is on the east side of the Jordan River, next to the Dead Sea down here. It's not on your map listed that way, but I'm just letting you know that's where Reuben is. And yet, they get kind of called out and thrown under the bus. Like, where were you? It doesn't say that Judah or Benjamin showed up either, and they would have been closer. Manasseh was even closer. They didn't get called out, but Reuben did. And it's just interesting. I don't even know why. I don't know why Reuben gets singled out. I got, a couple theories. Yes. Now, right. But Dan, okay, so we'll keep going because there's a couple more here. The district of Reuben, there was much searching of heart. They ended up staying with their flocks. Verse 17, Gilead stayed beyond the Jordan. So Gilead is more up in, we'll find out more about them, but they're up in this area here. But they didn't cross the river and come over and help. Okay. And that's not a tribe. That's just an area within a tribe. And then Dan, the tribe of Dan did what? They lingered by the ships. Okay. So Dan is kind of in this area on the coast right here. Okay. But they stayed by their boats. And then one more, Asher. So we got Naphtali up here. Asher's next to it, right on the coast. Between Naphtali and the Mediterranean Sea is the tribe of Asher. And what do? They stayed on the coast. Matter of fact, they stayed in the coves. Okay? But Zebulun risked their very lives, and so did Naphtali. So in this song of celebration, there's some of these tribes that kind of get called out. I'm like, hey, where were you? You had the opportunity to help too, and you didn't. And I don't know. It may not seem that significant, but I think it's there on purpose.
How long would it have taken to notify them that there was going to be a battle they needed to show up to?
Well, how long did it take for Barak to get 10,000 men together? I mean, it wasn't just an overnight thing. So my guess would be, hold on, let me see real quick where, if it says where, okay, so Deborah is down here, and y'all have this on your maps, between Ramah and Bethel. So this is where she is down here. She calls Barak to come from all the way up here, down here, talks with her, then the two of them go back together. So my guess would be, even though God specifically said, get Naphtali and Zebulun, they're the closest to where Sisera and these chariots are. We want to use them. On their way back, they're going through multiple tribes. And so my guess would be that on their way, they're going, hey, anybody else want to join up? Issachar did, apparently. There's other tribes that joined up. Would it have taken a couple of days? Would it have taken a month? I don't know for sure. It didn't happen overnight. They couldn't call or text message or anything like that. It would have taken a little bit to send messengers out and, hey, we want to gather. And how long does it take for everybody to get the message, get their stuff together, and show up? So it took a little while. This is a plot that took a little while to take place. But again, there's some other tribes that had the opportunity to join in, and they didn't. And I think, there's just sometimes, it take a lesson from that. There's sometimes that we have opportunities to help, and we just don't. It's uncomfortable. It's scary. We've got other things to do, and there's something that an opportunity God may be putting right in front of us, and we stay by the ships. We stay with the sheep. We don't take advantage. of the opportunity that God gives us. So let me hear from you guys. We got a few minutes left in class. What are some things that you can pull from the story of Deborah and Barak in jail? Anything that stands out to you?
I think when you're called to do something, you need to do it.
Yeah.
So when you get that calling, it's and you know in your heart what's right and what's wrong to do.
Yeah.
You just need to do it.
Yeah. When you get the call, you need to do it. And that's one of the things I wrote down. Going back to her song again, in chapter 5, in Judges chapter 5, look at, let's see. I've got it written down. Verse 9. Deborah says, "My heart is with Israel's princes and with the willing volunteers among the people. Praise the Lord." In verse 12, wake up, Deborah, wake up, break out in song. Arise, O Barak, take captive your captives, O son of Abinoam. There's an enthusiasm, at least on Deborah's part. Here's this calling. Here's something that God has given her the opportunity to do, and she does it willfully. She does it joyfully. She does it, with enthusiasm. And sometimes, even if I do the thing that God calls me to do, I'm kind of doing it grudgingly. And what kind of heart do I have? To your point, when God calls me to have a conversation with somebody, or help somebody, or to say no to a certain decision, or yes to something else, am I gritting my teeth through it? Or am I like, man, awesome, I'm excited about this? What's my attitude as I accept the call? Barak kind of dragged his feet a little bit. Okay, I'll go, but you better go with me,
And if you look at verse 2, it says, when the princes in Israel take the lead, when the people willingly offer themselves, praise the Lord.
Yeah. When people willingly do what God calls them to do, that's a reason to celebrate. Yep. Good. Anybody else? What else do we see from Deborah?
Women were the prominent characters in this particular battle.
Absolutely. I think that's important. I think it's important to recognize that female leadership has always had a place in God's kingdom. That's not just a 21st century thing. That's not just a New Testament thing. You go back to Old Testament times. There are times, excuse me, that God used women as leaders, as the people to follow. And this is definitely one example of that. And along that same line, I think it's important to remember that God's going to call who He's going to call, and He's going to use whoever He's going to use. And we've already seen that. He used left-handed Ehud. He's used, as we talked about earlier in class this morning, he used a farmer with a sharp stick. Like God's got a plan, and God's got a purpose, and He'll use whoever He wants to. And it's not up to us to necessarily dictate to Him who He should use and who He shouldn't. Anything else? Yeah. Throughout the whole thing. Yeah. God is fighting this battle for you. God has already gone ahead of you. This whole song is, look at what God did. Yep, absolutely. It is not about them. It's about God.
And I think a lot of times we say, oh, we were so lucky, or we were so, and it's like, no, we were blessed.
Yeah. Yeah.
God's favor shone on us.
Yeah. God actually did that for us. Instead of, wasn't that fortunate? Yeah.
We have a funny story. You want to hear a funny story?
Sure.
So, yesterday, I went to buy some flowers to pot and stuff.
Uh-huh.
And my sister-in-law went with me, and I ran to go do something else while she was at Lowe's to get these flowers, and the lady, this lady, a little older than me probably, but she was like, Melissa said, she was like worn out. She was working there, and she was tired, and she was marking some stuff down, and she said, if you see anything along this area here that you want, I'll mark it down for you. And Melissa was like, well, how much? And she's like, oh, not a certain percentage, just bring it to me, I'll mark it down. I mean, she was just done. Done.
Yeah.
So Melissa filled like a big old car, flat thing, full of flowers, and she just took them to her. And we thought, well, we'll just, because then I came back and I was like, yeah, we'll just see how she marks them down.
Yeah.
That lady started marking stuff down. I got like $18 hanging pots for $1.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, she was like, just wow.
Just slashing stuff.
Yeah, and so Melissa or something, everyone was making fun of me because then I was like, oh, it helps me fit my budget better now that my husband's
Yeah.
retired.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just like this big joke.
Yeah.
And I said, no, it was the favor of the Lord because
Yeah.
I needed that because plants are so daggum expensive
Mhm.
this year.
Yeah.
And so, like, she saved me a ton of money.
Absolutely, she did.
So,
Or he did.
yeah.
God did.
Yeah. So anyway, that's
Yeah.
my funny story because everyone, was like, no, it's just the favor of
It's the favor of the Lord. He's looking out for you. He knew you needed those plants. Real quick, because we're going to run out of time. So let me, it's already the end of our class time. If y'all give me just a minute, I want to point something else out to you. Go over to Hebrews chapter 11, which is often referred to as the catalog of the faithful, right? The list of people with great faith. Okay? Hebrews chapter 11. Sorry, it's taking me a minute to get there after I ask y'all to turn there. Okay, so it mentions, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, all these different people. And then look at verse 32. And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets. So who's listed here as in the list of people who have great faith? Barak. Not Deborah or Jael, either one. Okay? Why is Barak listed?
He did what he was called to do.
Yeah, but we're talking about people with great faith, right? Did he have great faith?
Well, only if she went.
Right. Because he's even like, I don't know if I want to go or not unless you're going to go with me. And he's going to be held up as a champion of faith? Does that seem right?
Maybe she had more influence on it. Not everything was written.
That's true. And there's some people that consider Barak to be one of the judges, not just Deborah. Now, he's never given that title in Scripture, but there's some people that think he was probably a leader as well, especially after this battle. It used to bother me. It used to bother me that, like, he wouldn't go unless she went with him, and yet he gets his name on the list, and she doesn't. So I came across this very recently, and it's made me feel so much better about this. So I'm going to keep reading after I left off there in verse 32. So keep reading with me. Here's the character traits of these guys that the author of Hebrews doesn't even have time to talk about. Verse 33, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. And just that sentence that I breezed past has an important phrase in it. Whose weakness was turned to strength. And I think of that whole list there of, Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah. Barak's the one that his weakness was turned to strength. His weakness is what?
It's timidity.
Yeah, he's timid. He's not sure. Okay? But what did God end up doing? Using it and winning a huge battle. Okay? Did he kill his sister himself? No, but he led 10,000 troops in a battle and was victorious because God had that plan for him. And that, the more I thought about it, I thought this whole story in Judges chapter 4 is weakness being turned to strength on display.
You may have seen Deborah as a source of wisdom, a source of whatever. So if you go with me, it's going to make me stronger.
Mm-hmm.
or whatever too.
Absolutely.
Some of you guys' strength was through some of that. Because I think a lot of times we don't allow people to come along with us
Mm-hmm.
because we want to do it ourselves.
Right. I want to make it all about me.
Right.
Yeah.
And so by allowing other people to help you with things can turn our weakness into strength.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Having people come alongside us is actually a strength and not a weakness. I will say this, though. Deborah, as a female, back in this time, could have been considered a weakness. God used her as a strength. Barak is timid, didn't want to go at first. God turned that weakness and that timidity into courage, as strength. Jael, this seemingly unknown woman, she's just married to a guy who happens to live in a big tent. And she's the one who literally deals the final blow in defeating this army. And that's what would have been perceived as a weakness, God uses as strength. This whole story is about faith, and it's about God taking our hesitation and our apprehensions and our typical way of viewing things and going, yeah, but I can do something with that. I can do something big with that. So let me. So whatever we consider to be weak about ourselves, whether it's our age or our gender or our how much money we have or don't have, or what kind of house we live in or don't live in, or our health or our mental capacity or whatever it is, just know God can still do something with that. God wants to do something with that, so let him. Let him do something. Let him turn weakness into strength. And when we trust him to do that, that's what faith is all about. So I'll let that be the final encouragement today. All right. Thank you, guys. We got through 2 of them. Took a little longer going back through the story than I intended to, but we got through 2 judges today. So we'll pick up next Tuesday with Gideon. If y'all want to read chapters 6 and 7 before we get there, before next week, feel free to do that. We'll talk about Gideon next Tuesday. Okay? Thank you, guys. I'm going to turn off the stream.